Hello everyone, Colin Canet here for WoodWorkWeb. Today we have something unusual. For a couple of years I've had a number of requests of people asking how to refinish guns, and today that's exactly what we're going to do. We have right here a single shot 22 that's in rather poor shape, and today we're going to be not only refinishing the stock, in another video we're going to be refinishing the barrel as well. Before we get started, there's one thing that I want to talk about, and that is gun safety, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you're working with any firearm safely. And in this case, I'm just going to be removing the bolt and taking it right away from the gun. Now, this gun that we're going to be refinishing, before you start in refinishing any gun, you need to understand about that gun in the sense that with some collectible guns, you can actually destroy a lot of the value by refinishing. This is an old Canadian classic. There's a lot of these around. This particular gun is a family heirloom, and we've been asked to refinish this because it wants to be kept in the family. And this gun will be completely stripped, and we will refinish it completely so that it looks almost as though it came out of the factory. Now, what I'm working with today is a single piece stock, and all stocks connect to a barrel in some sort of mechanical fashion. In this case, it's a simple screw that we need to undo, but it could also be sometimes there's a metal band that goes around here. So what we need to do is to take the barrel off of the stock, and then we need to strip the stock of the trigger guard and of the heel. So let's just start that process. Now we take the barrel and we remove that to a safe location. And now we just need to strip the trigger guard. Now, that's just pure wood that we have right now. We're going to use a paint stripper to strip off this varnish that's on here. So the next thing I'm going to do is get this ready to put this on. The stripper that I'm using is something that's available commercially, and they say to put it in a small container, which I'm doing, and to simply liberally paint it on the product that you want to strip. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now you need to make sure I'm wearing eye protection, and you need to make sure that you wear gloves and eye protection with any of these strippers, even if they say they're organic, because they can still be caustic. And I'm going to cover this liberally. Then I'm going to cover the entire gun with plastic to seal it. And I'm just using like a saran, very thin plastic, and then we'll let that sit. And this will help to prevent the stripper from drying out, and it will continue to work. Now, the reason that we're using a stripper rather than just sanding it is we want to leave as much of the patina on the gun. So this has got some bumps and some scratches from 50 years of use, and we don't want to destroy that. We just want to cover and refinish the top of the gun, and the best way to do that is by first of all stripping. Then we will do some light sanding after we've had a look at it underneath. So I'm just going to seal that up, and we'll come back in about 15 or 20 minutes and we'll have a look at that, and that material on there should be nice and soft. We should be able to easily wipe that off. Now we've taken the saran off of the paint stripper, and I've just for the last couple of minutes I've been using my scraper just to now scrape all of that 50-year-old varnish off this. and I've done a pretty good job, but what I'm finding now is we're still going to have to do some light sanding. So I'm very lightly doing a little bit of 80 grit, but before long I'm going to be going to a 150 grit. And it's important, particularly around here, that you don't do too much sanding. Otherwise, your hardware that fits on here is not going to be fitting properly. So we're just going to, and I'm not going to do a lot of sanding on the camera. I'll do that off camera because sanding is just sanding, and we'll come back after we've got this sanded down and we're ready to start doing some stains. Now we finished sanding. We went from a tiny bit of 80, then we went to 150, and we finished up with 220. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just using rubbing alcohol that you can get from the drugstore, and I'm going to clean the dust off, the sanding dust. And the reason we use alcohol, you can use water, but the reason we like to use alcohol is because it doesn't lift the grain. Water will lift the grain, just like it does with your hair, makes your hair fly away when you come out of the... Now, there's an area there. We knew that this was here. There's a crack in the wood down here. And before we get too far down the road here, we need to figure out what we're going to do with this crack. And in this case, because we're going to be staining this gun, or we're actually going to dye this gun, this crack, we're going to dye everything first of all, and then we're going to fix this crack. And the reason we're doing that is because if we get any glue outside here, we can't finish it properly. So we're going to be showing you why we're doing it in this way. Okay, so very quickly, this is like a crazy glue. And I have an accelerator for it, so it dries very quickly. But here's what happens when you try and put dye or stain over glue. Let's just wipe that down a bit. See how it goes everywhere else except where the glue is. And that'll wipe right off of there. So we wanted, in this case, we're going to do all of our dyeing of the wood beforehand, and then we'll glue this little chunk on after we have colored the wood. All right, there's our stock, nicely dried. And just for your information, this is the kind of dye that I use. It comes in a package like that, and it's a water soluble. So in the end, I really did put a water-based stain on here. So I'm going to very lightly touch it with some very fine steel wool before we start the finish. But before we do that, I need to do a little bit of work on this chip on the end, and I've decided that I'm going to use a 5-minute epoxy so that we can get on with this. And I'm just mixing the two parts, the A and B, nothing fancy, just a ordinary 5-minute. You could use wood glue, all sorts of glues. You could use pretty much anything that glues wood. I'm using this because I want to be able to get on with this job here of finishing this, so I'm using this 5-minute epoxy. Now that's all I need to do. Now what I'm going to do next, I'm going to clamp it temporarily with that, and that will seal it nicely. And I'm just going to let that sit for a few minutes, and when we come back we'll be able to get on with our finishing. Well, we're finally ready to start finishing. Now there's our epoxy, and you can see that it's nice and dry, so that means that this area here, when we take the tape off, that'll be well sealed, so that looks good. Now, because we used a little bit of a water-based dye on here, I'm just giving a very, very light dusting of the steel wool, just to any grain that might have lifted. It doesn't take much. There, that feels good. Okay, now we're using this product called Seikos. This is actually an kind of an oil, a pure oil, and this is used for hardwood floors, which is why I love this material. And we don't use very much of it. I put a little bit in the lid. That's more than enough to do what we're doing here. And we use these little, they look like a little pad, a little foam pad, and all we do is dip that in there, and we rub against the grain to begin with. And we just put a little bit on there and rub against the grain. And then when we get finished, we finish up by rubbing with the grain. So I'm just going to keep rubbing in circles until we get this finished. And you can see how this stain and this finish has just really brought the color out in this stock. Now some of this area here I got a little bit too much on. I'm going to wipe just a little bit of that off, because it's better to have a finer, you're better to have less material than too much with this stuff. I'm just taking a final very light wipe, and that will dry very hard. And when we come back, we'll put the rest of the coats on, and this is what the gun will look like when it's finished. We finished all of the parts of the gun, and we're going to do a reassembly, but I wanted you to have a quick look at the stock with 3 coats of that Seikos on there. It just looks absolutely brilliant. It shows the texture, but there's still a little bit of a luster, a sheen to it. On our second video, we're doing rebluing, and we'll upload that video shortly. But I can't tell you how happy I am with this cold bluing. This worked very, very well. It did just a great job. So we're going to put this back together again now and put all the pieces of the gun together. And we even polished the bolt. Our rifle refinishing project has turned out just brilliant. The wood looks excellent. Even the rebluing, which we weren't quite certain of, has turned out beyond our expectations. So the whole thing has come together very, very well. We'll have a separate video on the rebluing, and you'll be able to see that shortly. If you like what we're doing, we ask you to subscribe to our channel. There will be a link to that right after this video, and some other links as well. But don't forget to follow us on Twitter, connect with us on Facebook and Google+. I'm Colin Canet for WoodWorkWeb. Thanks for watching.